All right, today we're diving into something that sounds, well, a little paradoxical. We're talking about a Wall Street titan who might just hold the key to fixing rural America's economy. And how he got there, it's definitely not the story you're expecting. So let's just get right to it, right? What in the world does a high-flying Wall Street financier know about the price of soybeans? I mean, really, you've got global capital flows over here, and you've got dirt, weather, and tractors over there. They couldn't feel more like two different planets. Well, here's the twist. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, actually has a very personal answer to that question. He said he's felt pain from global trade shocks. Why? Because, and get this, he's actually a soybean farmer. That one little detail changes everything. It totally reframes how he sees the entire economic landscape. And that's the lens we're going to use for this whole explainer. This dual perspective. The Wall Street insider who's also a heartland farmer. So let's break it down. We're going to look at his diagnosis of the problem first, and then dive into the toolkit he's put together to try and fix it. Okay, so first things first, the diagnosis. You can't fix a problem if you don't know what's causing it, right? So what does this Wall Street farmer see when he looks at rural America? What's the root cause of this economic drain? And at the very heart of it all is this one key economic idea, being a price taker. Think about what that means. It means you have absolutely zero leverage. Imagine you spend an entire year growing a crop. You pour everything into it, and then you take it to market, and someone just tells you, this is what we'll pay. You have to take it. No negotiation. That's the incredibly vulnerable spot so many American farmers find themselves in. And this is where being a price taker gets really, really dangerous. Bessent saw this firsthand on his own farm. A huge buyer, let's say a country like China, can just stop buying. And just like that, demand for your product vanishes overnight. Poof! That kind of shockwave just hammers rural America, where a single policy decision made thousands of miles away can literally wipe out a community's entire economy for a year. But it's not just about trade, you know? It's not just about the price you get for your crops. The problem goes even deeper than that, into the really complex world of global finance. It turns out that these huge decisions about where money moves around the globe can have a direct and often really damaging impact right in the heartland. Okay, check out this example because it makes it super clear. The U.S. Treasury sets up something called a currency swap line with Argentina. Now, that sounds incredibly abstract and boring, right? But what happened? Suddenly, Argentina could sell its soybeans to China way cheaper, and they ended up directly displacing American farmers. It's a perfect example of how this high-level financial diplomacy can be totally disconnected from what's happening on the ground, and it can accidentally just suck the value right out of rural communities. All right, now let's talk about a really critical piece of this puzzle. The local banks. Community banks, right? You look at the big picture, and they only hold maybe 15% of all the banking assets in the U.S. So you might think they're small players. But get this. They're responsible for 40% of all small business loans and a whopping 70% of agricultural loans. They are, quite literally, the financial lifeblood of rural America. So this is the key point in Bessent's diagnosis, these absolutely essential local banks. They didn't just slowly fade away on their own. He argues that they were actively, structurally weakened by decades of policy and regulations that basically choked off the credit, the very thing that keeps money flowing in a local economy. Okay, so that diagnosis brings us to a huge turning point in this story, a major evolution in thinking, especially when it comes to the very controversial topic of tariffs. And you can see that evolution right here. Back in his hedge fund days, Bessent was a critic of tariffs. Standard Wall Street view. But now, he sees them as a necessary tool, a way to fight back, to rebalance what he sees as unfair trade, and to shield American producers from those crazy global shocks we talked about. And he's been super direct about this change of heart. When he says, I've had an open mind and I've evolved on this, that's a huge deal. That's a major break from that pure free market thinking. It's a shift, really, towards a more protectionist stance. And it's all rooted in this belief that maybe, just maybe, completely free global trade has actually hurt the U.S. in the long run. So that's the diagnosis and the big philosophical shift. So what do you do about it? What's the plan? Well, the proposed solution is a really cohesive three-part response. Okay, pillar number one is all about putting that new philosophy on trade into action. And the idea here is to use tariffs not as a giant wall to keep everyone out, but more like a lever to get better deals. The goal is to stop other countries from displacing American goods, and most importantly, to create more stable, predictable demand for things like soybeans. It's a direct attack on that price taker problem. All right, pillar two, this one is all about fixing the financial plumbing of the rural economy. And the proposal is to hit the fundamental reset button for those incredibly important community banks. So, what does a reset actually look like? Well, for starters, it means cutting a ton of red tape. A lot of the regulations that came out after the 2008 financial crisis were kind of a one-size-fits-all deal, and they ended up just suffocating the little guys. So the goal here is to tailor the rules for these smaller banks, cut their insane compliance costs, and just make it easier for them to do what they're there to do, lend money to the local farmer and the small business down the street. And that brings us to pillar three, which is all about immediate help. Look, rebalancing global trade and fixing the banking system, that stuff takes time. So in the meantime, you've got to stop the bleeding. We're talking about things like direct, one-time payments to farmers who got hammered by those trade disruptions. We're talking tax reforms to put more cash back into rural pockets. And also creating new domestic demand, like for biofuels, so there's another place for farmers to sell their crops. Okay, so there you have it. Three pillars: trade, banking, and direct support. But what's the end game here? What's it all supposed to lead to? The big idea is to break this vicious cycle of decline we've seen and kickstart a new, virtuous cycle of growth. And this is how that virtuous cycle is supposed to work. It all starts here with more stable incomes for farmers thanks to better trade. Okay, so now they're stable. That allows the local community banks to feel more confident and lend more money. That new lending helps the local businesses on Main Street expand. And all of this creates something economists call higher money velocity. It just means that every dollar circulates more times inside the local community before it leaks out. And the end result, a much more resilient, self-sustaining rural economy. Really, when you boil it all down, the entire strategy is about one core thing. For decades, you can think of rural America's economy as a leaky bucket. Capital has just been draining out. The whole point of this toolkit is to plug those leaks and get that money circulating inside the bucket again, from the farmer to the bank to the shop on Main Street, and then right back to the farmer. And that brings us to the big final question. The diagnosis seems pretty clear. The toolkit is definitely comprehensive, but the challenges facing rural America are, well, they're immense. So, will this combination of trade protection, financial deregulation, and direct cash support actually be enough to restart the engine? That right there is the multi-billion-dollar question we're all waiting to see answered.